that derelict was a death trap.
Science fiction has a long history of telling poignant human stories through the lens of non-human subjects. 2022's Citizen Sleeper earned its place alongside stories like Blade Runner almost instantly thanks to its introspective interrogation of personhood and community in a world where all of it feels fragile. And this sequel's strong, system-hopping story consistently hits the same highs. And though it can be very slow-paced, repetitive, and full of walls of text, a byproduct of its tabletop-inspired design, overhauled survival systems, new multi-layered crew missions, and an upgraded sense of tension in every dice roll make Citizen Sleeper 2 Starward Vector feel more engaging more often. Citizen Sleeper's RPG qualities resemble pen and paper systems like Blades in the Dark and Ironsworn more than popular RPGs like Dungeons & Dragons or video games like Final Fantasy. This is most evident in how little you interact with your stats from a planning and preparation perspective. How good and bad you are at things affects everything you do, and proper allocation of the limited amount of dice you have for the task ahead is the crux of your decision making. But there's very little you can do to modify the outcome of these rolls or buffer yourself against potential consequences outside of that. This is a limitation that can also be freeing, because you spend less time trying to shield yourself from Citizen Sleeper's whims and more time learning to go with the flow, cheering your triumphs and swallowing your defeats. Starward Vector stays committed to the idea that great drama arises when you can't just min-max your way through adversity in a way that still feels just as novel as it did the first time. I welcomed this drama with open arms, as it solved my issue with the previous game's passivity and made sure I had to really consider every option every time. Your Sleeper, an android protagonist who is a machine in body, but an emulation of a long-deceased human in mind, still comes in 3 classes. I chose the Extractor, well-equipped for enduring physical labor and excelling at diving headlong into risky environments, but woefully unfit for the more delicate and technical work. The strengths and weaknesses of every class are expressed slightly differently here than the original, all in the pursuit of making dice rolling portions of Citizen Sleeper 2 more tenuous. Your dump stat can't be improved at all, and spending your dice on any action that uses the stat as its basis, like the Extractor's Intuit skill, gets a -2 penalty. Most actions have at least 2 different stats that could be used to attempt the task, but it can be devastating in the uncommon event that the only way to succeed a check is rolling at such a severe disadvantage. Citizen Sleeper 2 makes good use of all its new crew systems, putting your hangers-on to work during more elaborate sequences. You can take up to 2 crew members with you on special jobs like scrapping old derelict ships out in space or surveying an asteroid for drinkable water, each with their own specializations and a pair of die that you can assign to tasks. Missions that require more hands are often longer and take several cycles of multiple steps to be completed. Bashing open the hull of a ship so a more hardware-inclined ally can find the mainframe and prep it for your hacker to steal some data, for example. Efficiency is key because every cycle costs supplies, and once you run out of those, disaster escalates quickly. Mixing and matching crew to shore up your weaknesses is handy, and your Sleeper's new push abilities, like the Extractor's Rally that buffs their die but also stresses everyone out, can be tactical godsends. Supply limits and surprise hazards really spice up these sections quite a bit, and they were easily the most fun parts of Citizen Sleeper 2. It's where I had to think the most on my feet, prepped the most before shipping out, and regretted it the most when I failed. The new stress meter replaces the old condition system, and though it affects your dice from cycle to cycle in similar ways, it can be a bit more brutal. Instead of a status bar that gradually ticks down, cutting off access to dice as the meter shrinks, that you can roll again once your condition returns to normal, stress points accumulate whenever you fail a check or some other unfortunate happening takes place. As your stress rises, so does the amount of numbers you will be penalized for rolling every single cycle. For instance, if your stress meter is past the halfway mark and any of your dice show between 1 and 3, they all take damage. Dice can take 3 damage each before they break, at which point they cannot be used again until they are repaired, which requires not so rare but not always accessible resources to do. More than once have I been stuck mid-mission, down a couple of dice, and pushing the limits of my remaining ones. These are frustrating moments, but they really do add a sense of danger that was sorely missing from the first game. It's also not as much of a problem late game when getting around is less of a hassle. Almost every mission involves making connections and building relationships with people. Community building in the static space station of Ireland's Eye was a core value of the original's plot, and Starward Vector re-emphasizes this message in its system-spanning journey, both in story and gameplay. It's a message that feels more important these days as well. Solidarity among like-minded people and a collective wit and will to fight for change can help overcome the limitations of class and resources when up against seemingly impossible odds. The writing itself is satisfying on the whole. It's not overly flowery or descriptive, allowing plenty of space between the mind and the words for your imagination to fill. It can be biting and direct when describing tense exploration sequences. It also really excels at creating dense webs of philosophical and existential conflict when dissecting concepts of personhood revolving around the android protagonist, as well as personal freedoms, as more than one outside agitator attempts to claim ownership over you in different, sometimes chilling ways. That said, it doesn't have the same kick when it comes to physical conflict, as its scenes of hectic gunfights and daring escapes don't quite hit in comparison. The colorful characters you meet along your journey are mostly believable individuals, even if they aren't all that layered or deep. Though enjoyable, you won't find many of these travelers and tinkerers to have surprising turns of personality or purpose outside of your first impressions. Even some of my favorite potential crewmates follow archetypes you've seen just about everywhere, like this little scamp who fills the role of spunky go-getter. Many NPCs that can't be lured into your party, from dutiful caretakers of small settlements to hardened bounty hunters, are all one-note caricatures that stay long enough to be novel when needed and vanish right before they become burdensome. A good quality borrowed from pulp noir and sci-fi novels that keeps the intrigue machine churning. Citizen Sleeper 2 Starward Vector does not stray too far from what made the first one a cult hit, but it doesn't need to. It tells a rich, poignant story about the complex nature of control of oneself when that self is a machine that can be rebooted and hacked, finding an enriching community in the face of overwhelming odds, and expressing personhood both to oneself and to others. Its visual novel-like presentation is heavy on reading and dice rolling, so it's not exactly pulse-pounding, but the retooled character classes and stats, new crew missions, and stress mechanics provide just enough feedback and create a sense of precarity throughout that it stays engaging. For more, check out our reviews of The Stone of Madness or Eternal Strands. And for everything else, stick with IGN.